Think about the smartest person you know. The one with sharp ideas, deep insights, maybe even a brilliance that amazes you. Now, ask yourself, are they thriving, or are they struggling just to be seen? Then look at someone else. Not particularly sharp, not especially insightful, yet somehow, life rolls out a red carpet for them. Why? Because the world doesn't truly revolve around intelligence. It revolves around money. We don't like to admit it, but money sets the stage long before intelligence even enters the room. It decides who gets access to the best schools, who builds networks early, who feels entitled to opportunity. A child born into wealth isn't just given more resources. They're placed in an environment where every door is already unlocked. Meanwhile, a child born into poverty may be equally gifted, but must fight uphill battles just to reach the starting line. Schools in wealthy neighborhoods attract better teachers, updated technology, endless programs, private tutoring, test prep, internships. Those aren't luxuries, they're expectations. And all of it compounds, making the gap wider and wider. By the time these kids reach adulthood, the playing field isn't just uneven, it's barely recognizable. Intelligence without financial backing has to claw for recognition. Money, even without brilliance, glides forward with ease. The workplace only amplifies this. Who gets the promotion? Often not the most competent, but the one who learned how to network at expensive universities, who can afford to wait out unpaid internships, who already has family safety nets behind them. Meanwhile, the truly capable are too busy surviving to play the long game. And when we look at innovation, the story repeats. The lone genius changing the world makes for a great headline. But behind every breakthrough stands capital. Without investors, ideas never leave the notebook. Without funding, prototypes never become products. For every invention you've heard of, there are thousands buried in obscurity, not because they weren't brilliant, but because they weren't profitable. And politics? The same script. Campaigns run on donations, not intelligence. Policies bend to lobbyists with money, not citizens with ideas. Media, too. Whoever pays can dominate the conversation, while thoughtful voices fade in the noise. It's not that intelligence doesn't matter. It does. But without money, its reach is painfully limited. Money doesn't whisper. It shouts. It rewrites rules, shifts culture, and buys history. That's why the world feels tilted, unequal, unfair. Because it is. But here's the catch. Awareness is leverage. The more clearly we see the rules, the better equipped we are to demand something better. A system where intelligence, creativity, and effort aren't crushed beneath the weight of money. Because today, the world doesn't celebrate genius. It celebrates what it always has: wealth, influence, and power. And if money can bend intelligence so easily, just imagine what it does to kindness. Because often, the very best qualities in people, their goodness, their empathy, their compassion, aren't just ignored, they're exploited. Good people are easily controlled. Have you ever noticed how often genuinely kind people find themselves stuck in situations they never wanted? The friend who keeps giving, even when they're drained. The coworker who always says yes, even when they should say no. The partner who sacrifices their needs, quietly, again and again. It's unsettling, isn't it? But the truth is this: good people are not weak. They're vulnerable. And their very strengths, compassion, empathy, loyalty, can become levers for control. Think about guilt. It's one of the simplest tools of manipulation. Good people naturally carry responsibility for others. When they're told they've let someone down, even slightly, the reflex is to apologize, to fix, to overextend. Manipulators know this. They don't have to force or threaten. They only need to press the guilt button, and good people willingly chain themselves. Then there's empathy. A good person doesn't just hear a struggle, they feel it. They imagine themselves in the other's shoes, and because of that, they struggle with boundaries. Saying no feels cruel. Refusing to help feels selfish. So when someone constantly plays the victim, good people step in. Again and again, until empathy shifts from connection to captivity. Approval plays a role too. Kind people want harmony. They want to be liked, respected, understood. So they avoid conflict. They bite their tongue rather than cause friction. and silence becomes compliance. Not because they agree, but because they don't want to disappoint. This is why institutions, not just individuals, exploit goodness. Workplaces lean on the team players to pick up the slack. Governments appeal to duty, telling citizens it's selfish to question or resist. Even in families, kindness is twisted. If you really loved me, you would. Over time, good people don't just give freely. They give automatically. And the most dangerous part? It often doesn't look like control. It looks like responsibility. It looks like doing the right thing. But slowly, the weight piles up. And the person carrying it doesn't realize how much of themselves they've lost along the way. So does this mean being good is a flaw? Number. Goodness is essential. It's what holds societies together. What builds trust. What gives meaning. But without awareness, goodness becomes exploitation waiting to happen. The challenge for good people is not to stop being kind. It's to recognize when kindness is being weaponized. To understand that boundaries aren't cruelty. They're protection. Because if you can't say no, your yes means nothing. And here's where the system benefits most. Because when good people are busy carrying everyone else's burden, they don't have the strength left to resist the larger forces draining them. For a society built on control, there's nothing more useful than an exhausted population of good people. Which leads us straight to the next truth: the system needs you exhausted. Why is it that being tired feels permanent? Why does exhaustion cling to us, no matter how much coffee we drink, no matter how many hours we sleep on the weekend? Because it isn't just life being busy. It's by design. The system needs you exhausted. Think about it. An exhausted worker doesn't ask for a raise. They don't fight unfair policies. They don't organize or protest. They barely make it through the day. Fatigue keeps people quiet. It makes obedience feel easier than resistance. Workplaces glorify burnout. Stay late. Answer emails at midnight. Sacrifice your health. And you're praised as dedicated. Meanwhile, the companies profit while you trade away years of your life. And when you finally collapse, they replace you without hesitation. Consumer culture feeds on the same cycle. You're tired, so you order takeout. You're drained, so you binge-watch shows designed to autoplay forever. You're anxious, so you buy comfort, new clothes, gadgets, endless distractions. Exhaustion becomes a business model. Your fatigue is their revenue. And it doesn't stop at work or shopping. Politics thrives on exhaustion too. When people are tired, they don't vote. They don't demand change. They don't flood the streets when rights are stripped away. They stay home. And that silence keeps the system stable. It's no accident that everything around you seems designed to drain energy. Commuting, bills, bureaucracy, layers of friction that chip away at your focus. Even social media plays its role, keeping your mind overstimulated but unfocused, giving you just enough dopamine to keep scrolling, but never enough clarity to break free. And here's the trap. Exhaustion disguises itself as normal life. We're told to be proud of overwork. We wear fatigue like a badge of honor, bragging about sleepless nights as if suffering equals value. Rest is treated as laziness. Slowing down feels like weakness. And so we stay caught in the loop, confusing survival with living. But make no mistake, clarity is dangerous to those in power. A rested mind asks questions. A rested body has energy to resist. That's why the system doesn't just allow exhaustion. It depends on it. So what's the way out? Not working harder, not hustling more, but reclaiming rest as a radical act. Protecting energy as fiercely as we protect income. Because the less tired you are, the more you see. And the more you see, the harder it becomes for the system to quietly control you. Exhaustion keeps us passive. Energy gives us choice. And when you finally have energy again, you'll notice something else. You'll notice the subtle comforts designed to keep you sitting still. Because once fatigue loses its grip, the next form of control takes over. Comfort. Comfort is the best form of control. We think of control as something obvious. Police, surveillance, laws, punishments, something heavy, something frightening. But the truth, the most effective form of control doesn't feel like control at all. It feels like comfort. Comfort is subtle. It's the warm couch, the endless stream of shows, food arriving at your door with a swipe. It's convenience disguised as freedom. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Because when life is comfortable, we stop asking questions. Why disrupt stability? Why risk progress if things already feel good enough? Comfort doesn't challenge you. It lulls you. It convinces you that silence is easier than struggle, that compliance is safer than change. And here's the trick. Systems know this. They don't need to rule by fear if they can keep you satisfied. It's far easier to offer cheap pleasures than to allow real power. Bread and circuses worked in ancient Rome. Today it's streaming, consumerism, endless novelty. Comfort isolates too. It teaches you to protect your own bubble of ease instead of pushing for collective progress. As long as you feel fine, the larger injustices stay outside your door. You may notice them, but they don't move you, because moving risks losing what you have. And here's the irony. Comfort feels like choice. You think you're in control when you choose convenience, when you choose distraction. But really, the system has already chosen for you. It built the options, set the defaults, made the trade-offs invisible. Ask yourself, when was the last time comfort held you back? The last time you stayed quiet at work because speaking up might threaten your job security? The last time you ignored an issue in your community because it doesn't affect me personally? The last time you turned on another show instead of confronting the unease in your own life? Comfort doesn't chain you. It cushions you. So softly that you don't realize you're stuck. This is why comfort is more effective than fear. Fear makes people push back. Comfort makes them relax. And a relaxed population rarely revolts. But here's the danger. Too much comfort weakens us. We lose resilience. We avoid risk. We surrender possibility. And once comfort defines the limits of our choices, we're not living freely. We're living predictably. That predictability is priceless to those in power. It means they can keep exploiting, keep profiting, keep ruling, while you stay on the couch. So does this mean comfort is bad? Number. It means comfort must be balanced, used as rest, not as replacement for purpose. Because real freedom isn't found in endless ease. It's found in the willingness to step into discomfort when comfort becomes a cage. And if comfort keeps us quiet, it sets the stage for the next lie we tell ourselves. The lie that makes us complicit in our own control. Because the system doesn't just use comfort, it teaches us to reward ourselves for denial. Which brings us to the next truth. Justice is a privilege, not a principle. We like to believe justice is blind, that the law protects everyone equally, regardless of background, wealth, or status. But deep down, we know that isn't true, because justice doesn't serve all, it serves some, and more often than not, it serves those who can afford it. Think about the courtroom. The wealthy don't face the same justice as the poor. They hire the best lawyers, delay cases, manipulate loopholes, and walk away with settlements. Meanwhile, the poor sit in overcrowded jails waiting for trials that may never come. Their crime? Often just not having enough money to buy freedom. Fines, bail, legal fees. Justice has a price tag. And when the system treats money as the key to fairness, fairness ceases to exist. Now let's go bigger. Entire laws are written with privilege in mind. Corporations lobby to shape regulations. Politicians backed by wealthy donors design policies that shield their benefactors. Ordinary citizens? They get slogans about equality, while the powerful get protection. Even in so-called landmark trials, where justice seems to prevail, look closer. How often is it about principle and how often is it about optics? Sacrificing a scapegoat to preserve trust in the system, while the deeper inequities remain untouched. And media plays its part. A high-profile case grabs headlines, presented as proof that justice works. But behind the scenes, thousands of smaller cases reveal the truth. Justice isn't universal. It's selective. This isn't about cynicism, it's about clarity. Justice as it stands isn't a principle applied equally to all. It's a privilege extended to those who can pay, who can influence, who can bend the system in their favor. And here's the dangerous part. We're taught to believe otherwise. We're told justice protects us, that we can rely on it. That blindfolded statue holding scales represents balance. But the scales are weighted. The blindfold is thin. So, what do we do with this truth? We stop pretending justice is guaranteed. We stop assuming fairness will arrive just because we deserve it. And we start recognizing the real rules. Power protects itself first, always. That doesn't mean principles don't matter. It means principles alone aren't enough without leverage. Justice as an ideal is noble, but justice in practice? It's rationed. And until it becomes unconditional, automatic, and universal, it will never be a principle. It will remain what it is now, a privilege. And here's where the pattern repeats. Because if justice thrives on punishment instead of prevention, then maybe it's not broken at all. Maybe it's running exactly the way it was designed. Which brings us to the next uncomfortable truth. Punishment is more profitable than prevention. We're told the system is designed to keep us safe, to prevent crime, to reduce harm, to solve problems before they grow. But look closer. That's not what it does. The system doesn't prioritize prevention. It prioritizes punishment. Why? Because punishment makes money. Think about prisons. They don't just hold people, they generate revenue. Private prisons profit from every occupied bed. The more inmates, the more contracts, the more dollars. There's no incentive to reduce crime. There's every incentive to keep cells full. Now look at healthcare. Curing disease should be the goal, right? But cures don't bring repeat customers. Chronic illness does. Managing symptoms, not solving them, creates lifelong dependency. Prevention, healthy food, early screenings, education is cheaper, but it doesn't feed billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies. Even cities rely on punishment. Parking tickets, fines, late fees, these bring steady income. Meanwhile, real solutions, like better infrastructure or public transport, cost money up front and cut into revenue streams later. It's the same with education. Funding tutoring, counseling, and resources would prevent dropouts. But it's easier and more profitable for the system to criminalize struggling youth, feeding them into pipelines of debt and incarceration. The logic is clear. Prevention reduces future income. Punishment guarantees it. And here's the sinister brilliance. Punishment can be sold as justice. When someone is fined, arrested, or imprisoned, we're told it's for safety, for accountability. But in truth, it's a transaction. The system profits. The problem remains. Think about how addiction is handled. Prevention would mean regulation, education, community programs. But addiction fuels entire industries. Rehab centers, pharmaceuticals, law enforcement. Treating it as a crime rather than a public health issue keeps the money flowing. The same applies to poverty. Preventing poverty through fair wages, health care, housing, that would break cycles. But cycles are lucrative. Debt collectors, payday lenders, interest rates, eviction fees, poverty itself becomes a product. So ask yourself, if punishment pays, why would the system ever choose prevention? And that's the disturbing truth. The system isn't failing when it punishes instead of preventing. It's succeeding at what it was built to do. But there's an even deeper layer. Because punishment doesn't just create profit, it protects power. And when it comes to power, the illusion of fairness is just as valuable as the profit itself. Which leads us to the next uncomfortable reality. Real power is never voted for. We're told democracy gives us power, that our vote is our voice, that the ballot box shapes our future. It's comforting to believe. But is it true? Look closely at how decisions are really made. Who writes the laws? Who funds the campaigns? Who shapes the narrative long before Election Day? It's not you. It's not me. It's the billionaires, the corporations, the lobbyists, the ones who never appear on the ballot. Elections are theater. They offer the illusion of choice while the real machinery of power stays untouched. The faces in office change, yes, but the structures, the money, the influence, the backroom deals remain exactly the same. Think about it. Why do campaign ads flood every screen? Why do candidates spend more time raising money than debating solutions? Because elections aren't contests of ideas. They're contests of funding. The more money behind you, the louder your voice, the wider your reach, the greater your chances. Not because you're right, but because you're resourced. And here's the deeper truth. Real power doesn't ask permission. It doesn't campaign. It doesn't beg for votes. It exists in boardrooms, in inherited wealth, in corporations that can topple economies with a single decision. These forces don't just influence politics, they own it. Even when you think you've won, when a candidate you support gets elected, watch what happens. They enter a system already designed to favor donors, industries, and entrenched interests. Their choices are constrained before they even begin. The theater continues. The power stays where it's always been. And when the system is threatened, power adapts. It rewrites rules, gerrymanders districts, floods the courts with favorable judges. It ensures the outcomes it wants, regardless of the people's vote. This doesn't mean voting is meaningless. It means voting is incomplete. It's one piece of a much larger puzzle, and the rest of the pieces are owned by those who never stand on a debate stage. The unsettling truth is this. Democracy offers us a sense of control, while real control operates quietly, without elections, without ballots, without your input. That's why it survives. Because as long as you believe the vote is everything, you won't look deeper. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Real power isn't granted by a majority. It's secured by money, by influence, by networks that stretch far beyond Election Day. And when we mistake visibility for power, we miss the forces that shape everything beneath the surface. Which brings us to the next illusion. Because if power is inherited, bought, and shielded, then what about success? The stories we're told about winners and achievers, are they truth? Or are they a trick of perspective? That leads us directly into the next reality. Most success is just survival bias. We love stories of success. The entrepreneur who made it. The athlete who beat the odds. The artist who rose from nothing. These stories inspire us. They make us believe that hard work guarantees reward. But here's the truth. Most success stories are illusions. They're survival bias, What does that mean? It means we only see the winners, the few who broke through. We don't see the thousands who tried just as hard, with just as much talent, and failed. Not because they weren't good enough, but because luck, timing, and access mattered more. Think about startups. For every celebrated tech billionaire, there are thousands of founders who worked nights, burned through savings, and walked away with nothing. We remember the one who succeeded, not the many who didn't. The media doesn't write headlines about the failures. Or think about athletes. We glorify the champion who grew up poor and fought their way to the top. But for every champion, there are countless others, just as skilled, who never got the right coach, the right exposure, or the right moment. They disappear from the narrative. Even in everyday life, survival bias clouds our judgment. We hear advice from the successful. Just work harder, just stay disciplined, just believe. But that advice ignores the invisible majority, those who worked just as hard and didn't make it. Their stories don't get told because we only listen to survivors. And here's why it's dangerous. Survival bias fuels the myth of meritocracy. It convinces us the system is fair because someone made it through. It lets us believe success is proof of superiority, when it's often proof of circumstance. Luck plays a bigger role than we want to admit. Where you were born, who you knew, when you entered the market. These factors shape outcomes far more than raw intelligence or effort. But we ignore them, because luck doesn't make for a heroic story. The result? We idolize the few and blame the many. We shame those who didn't succeed, labeling them lazy or unworthy, when in reality, the odds were stacked against them from the start. This doesn't mean effort is meaningless. It means effort alone isn't enough. And until we admit that, we'll keep chasing myths and overlooking the structural barriers that stop most people from ever standing a chance. So the next time you hear a story of incredible success, ask yourself, how many others tried the same thing and disappeared? What do their untold stories reveal about the system? Because until we listen to both the winners and the forgotten, we'll keep mistaking survival for destiny. And speaking of stories that mislead, let's look at another one. The story told to us every single day by the glowing screens in our homes. Because while we think the news is here to inform us, the truth is far darker. News exists to keep you watching, not informed. The news promises clarity. Headlines flash. Anchors speak with confidence. Urgent music plays in the background. It feels like information. But look closer. What you're watching isn't designed to inform. It's designed to hold your attention. Because attention equals money. Every headline, every breaking update, every exclusive report, it's all bait. The goal isn't to give you truth. It's to keep your eyes glued to the screen, your ears tuned to the broadcast, your clicks registered on the site. That's how media makes its money, by selling your attention to advertisers. And what holds attention best? Not nuance, not calm discussion, but fear, outrage, division. Think about the last time you scrolled through headlines. How many were designed to make you feel anxious, angry, or afraid? That's not a coincidence. Our brains are wired to respond to threats. So if news outlets can trigger that response, they guarantee you'll keep watching. But here's the cost. Constant fear distorts reality. A single crime reported on a loop convinces us danger is everywhere. One political scandal magnified daily convinces us collapse is imminent. The news doesn't reflect the world as it is. It reflects the version of the world most profitable to show. And it's not just what they emphasize, it's what they leave out. Stories that don't spark outrage, don't fuel conflict, don't keep you hooked. They vanish. Progress, solutions, quiet successes. You rarely see them because they don't drive clicks. This is why we live in cycles of panic. Not because the world is ending every day, but because panic keeps you tuned in. And here's the darker truth. When news shapes perception, it shapes reality. If people believe danger is everywhere, they act out of fear. If they believe their neighbors are enemies, they divide. And divided, distracted people are easier to control. So the next time you turn on the news, notice how it makes you feel. Are you informed or are you agitated? Do you walk away with clarity or with the urge to keep watching for just one more update? Because the difference matters. Information empowers, but entertainment disguised as information manipulates. And the modern news industry has chosen manipulation. So what can you do? Turn off the constant cycle. Seek multiple sources. Value depth over speed. Because when you control your attention, you take back the power they profit from. And speaking of attention, this brings us directly to the next truth. Because it's not just the news competing for your focus. Every app, every platform, every notification is designed to capture and sell the most valuable commodity you have. Your attention. Your attention is the most valuable commodity. We tend to think money drives the modern world, and in one sense, it does. But underneath it all, there's something even more valuable. Something every corporation, every platform, every screen is fighting for. Your attention, because attention is the gateway to everything else. If they have your focus, they can shape what you believe. If they have your focus, they can sell you products, ideas, even entire identities. Control attention, and you control behavior. That's why tech companies spend billions engineering ways to keep you hooked. Notifications timed to trigger curiosity. Endless feeds designed to make you scroll without thinking. Recommended videos that autoplay before you can decide. These aren't glitches, they're traps, carefully crafted by teams of psychologists and engineers who know exactly how your brain works. The business model is simple. The longer you stay, the more ads you see. The more ads you see, the more money they make. Your distraction is their revenue stream. But here's the deeper truth. Once your attention is captured, it doesn't just generate profit, it generates control. Because what you give your focus to shapes how you see the world. Algorithms filter reality. They decide which news you read, which voices you hear, which stories you miss. And slowly, invisibly, your worldview narrows, not by choice, but by design. Think about how many times you've picked up your phone without meaning to. How many hours disappeared into apps you didn't even enjoy. That's not weakness, that's engineering. Addiction isn't a side effect, it's the business model. And here's the frightening part. When attention becomes currency, truth no longer matters. What matters is engagement, what gets clicks. And emotion, fear, anger, outrage, outperforms facts every time. This is why misinformation spreads so easily. Not because people are foolish, but because lies are often more engaging than truth. Platforms don't care if content is accurate. They care if it keeps you watching. So ask yourself, who benefits when your focus is scattered, when your mind is consumed by endless noise? It isn't you. It's the companies selling your attention to the highest bidder. Your time, your energy, your ability to think clearly. These are the real commodities being traded. And every moment you lose to distraction is a moment of power handed away. That's why reclaiming your attention is revolutionary. Not just for your productivity, not just for your peace of mind, but because once you decide where your focus goes, you take back control from systems designed to keep you docile. Attention is power, and it belongs to you if you choose to protect it. And that brings us full circle. Because if attention can be engineered, if distraction can be monetized, then truth itself has no guarantee of survival. What spreads fastest isn't accuracy, it's emotion. Which leads us straight into the next truth. Truth doesn't spread. Emotion does. Here's something you've probably noticed but never named. Facts get ignored. Stories go viral. Statistics put people to sleep. Outrage wakes them up. Why? Because your brain doesn't run on logic. It runs on feeling. And the people who understand this, they win. Every single time. Think about the last thing you shared online. Was it a carefully researched article? Or was it something that made you angry? Something that made you feel seen? Something that confirmed what you already believed? That's not an accident. That's how information actually moves through the world. Truth is slow. It's cautious. It asks you to think. Emotion is instant. It bypasses your critical thinking entirely and hits you in the chest. Fear spreads faster than facts. Anger travels further than analysis. And belonging? Belonging beats truth almost every time. This is why misinformation thrives. Not because people are stupid, but because emotional resonance beats factual accuracy in the race for attention. Look at advertising. Nobody buys a product because of its specifications. They buy it because of how it makes them feel. Status, security, belonging. The same principle applies to ideas. Politicians don't win on policy details. They win on emotional connection. Scientists can have all the data in the world, but if they can't make you feel why it matters, they lose to someone with a better story and no evidence. Now here's what makes this dangerous. When you understand that emotion spreads truth, you have a choice. You can use that knowledge to manipulate. Or you can use it to communicate what actually matters. Because here's the thing. Truth paired with emotion, that's powerful. That's how movements start. That's how minds change. Not through facts alone, but through facts wrapped in stories that make people care. The question isn't whether emotion is more powerful than truth. It is. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Are you going to check your own emotional reactions? Question why certain things make you feel so strongly? Pause before you share something that makes your blood boil? Or are you going to keep letting your feelings make your decisions for you? Because once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. Every headline designed to make you click. Every post crafted to make you share. Every narrative built to make you feel rather than think. But awareness is power, and now you know what to look for. Now let's talk about how reputation works, because it follows the same emotional logic. Reputation is a weapon, not a reflection. Your reputation isn't who you are. It's what people need you to be. And that distinction, it changes everything. Think about someone you know who has a bad reputation. Now ask yourself, do you know it's true? Or do you just know what you've heard? Do you have first-hand evidence? Or did someone else's story become your truth? Reputation moves faster than facts. It's built on gossip, rumor, selective memory. And once it's established, it's almost impossible to change. Here's the uncomfortable part. Reputation can be manufactured. It can be weaponized. And it is. Constantly. When someone powerful wants to discredit you, they don't need to prove you're bad. They just need to make enough people believe you're bad. A whisper here, a rumor there. Suddenly your character is on trial, and you never even knew the case was being built. This happens in workplaces, in relationships, in politics. Someone's reputation is destroyed not because of what they did, but because of what someone else said they did. And the defense? Nearly impossible. Because you can't fight a story with facts, not when emotion is already spreading it faster than you can respond. Now flip it. Think about someone with a sparkling reputation. Someone everyone respects. Are they actually good? Or are they just good at managing perception? Because here's what reputation really is. It's social currency. And like all currency, it can be counterfeited. People with power understand this instinctively. They don't just protect their actions, they protect their image. They have PR teams, lawyers, strategies for crisis management, because they know reputation isn't earned, it's crafted. Meanwhile, regular people operate as if honesty is enough, as if being good means having a good reputation. And then they're shocked when one mistake, one misunderstanding, one bad faith interpretation destroys years of trust. This isn't about becoming cynical. It's about becoming realistic. Your reputation is a tool. Sometimes it's used for you. Sometimes it's used against you. But it's rarely an accurate reflection of who you actually are. So, protect it, yes. But don't confuse it with your actual character. Don't let the fear of reputation damage keep you from doing what's right. And don't assume someone else's reputation tells you the whole story. Because in a world where perception is reality, the truth often gets buried under what people want to believe. And what do people believe? They believe whoever sounds most confident. Let's talk about that. We value confidence more than competence. Watch this happen in real time. Two people in a meeting. One speaks with absolute certainty, voice steady, eye contact unwavering. They could be completely wrong, but they sound right. The other person hesitates, says, "I think," instead of, "I know." Admits uncertainty, shows the complexity of the problem. Who gets listened to? The confident one. Every time. This is one of the most dangerous patterns in human psychology. We are hardwired to trust confidence, not competence, not accuracy. Confidence. That doctor who admits they're not sure? Less trustworthy than the one who acts certain, even if the uncertain one is being more honest. That job candidate who talks about their limitations? Passed over for the one who oversells their abilities. Confidence is magnetic. It's persuasive. It makes people feel safe. And in a world of overwhelming complexity, people want someone who seems to know what they're doing, even when they don't. This creates a perverse incentive structure. The loudest voice wins. The most assertive person gets promoted. The one who admits doubt gets left behind. And here's the cruelest irony. Truly competent people are often less confident. Not because they lack skill, but because they understand complexity. They know what they don't know. They see the nuance. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. The less someone knows, the more confident they tend to be. The more someone knows, the more aware they are of uncertainty. But we reward the wrong end of that spectrum. Think about leadership. How many leaders rise to power not because they're the best, but because they're the most convinced they should lead? How many bad decisions get made because someone spoke with authority rather than accuracy? This pattern is everywhere. In politics, in business, in your personal life. You've probably seen it. The friend who gives terrible advice with complete confidence. The expert who's wrong but certain. The person who talks over everyone and gets credited for ideas they didn't even understand. So what do you do with this knowledge? First, learn to separate confidence from competence. When someone speaks with absolute certainty, ask, do they actually know? Or do they just sound like they do? Second, value uncertainty. The person who says, I don't know, let me find out, is often more trustworthy than the one who has an immediate answer to everything. And third, if you are competent, learn to communicate it confidently, not arrogantly, but clearly. Because if you don't, someone less qualified but more certain will take your place. Confidence isn't bad. But mistaking it for competence? That's how we end up with leaders who can't lead, experts who aren't expert, and systems that fail because nobody questioned the person who sounded most sure. Speaking of systems that fail, let's examine why they never seem to get fixed. Every system is designed to stay broken. Education is broken, healthcare is broken, justice is broken, politics is broken. You hear this constantly. And yet nothing changes. Why? Because maybe, just maybe, broken is how they're supposed to work. Not for you, but for someone. Think about it. When a system fails you repeatedly, when obvious problems never get solved despite endless complaints, one of two things is true. Either everyone in charge is completely incompetent, or the system is working exactly as designed, just not for you. Take healthcare. You'd think the goal is keeping people healthy. But look at where the money flows. The most profitable patients aren't the healthy ones. They're the chronically ill. The ones who need medication for life. The ones who return again and again. A cured patient is a lost customer. I'm not saying doctors want you sick. I'm saying the system isn't incentivized to make you well. It's incentivized to manage your illness profitably. Education? If it was designed to create critical thinkers, it would look completely different. Instead, it rewards compliance, memorization, standardization. It produces workers, not questioners. And that's not a bug. That's a feature. Justice? It's not designed for fairness. It's designed for order. The order that keeps current power structures intact. That's why the wealthy rarely face consequences, while the poor face the full weight of the law for minor infractions. Here's the pattern. Systems that appear broken to you are often functioning perfectly for someone else. And the reason they never get fixed? Because fixing them would mean redistributing power, and power doesn't redistribute itself voluntarily. Second, change your environment. You can't willpower your way out of a system designed to defeat willpower, but you can remove triggers, delete apps, change routes, build friction between you and the behavior. And third, reject the shame. Addiction thrives on shame. Shame keeps you isolated, keeps you blaming yourself, keeps you from seeing the pattern. This doesn't mean everyone within these systems is corrupt. Most people working in healthcare, education, and justice genuinely want to help. But they're operating within structures that have different priorities. The system eats good intentions for breakfast. So what do? First, stop waiting for broken systems to fix themselves. They won't. The dysfunction serves someone, and that someone has more power than you do. Second, work around them when possible. Build alternatives. Support people and organizations creating different models. And third, recognize that real change doesn't come from within broken systems. It comes from pressure applied from outside. The system isn't going to save you, but understanding how it actually works, that's the first step toward building something better. And understanding how suffering gets turned into profit, that's even more important. Suffering is monetized at scale. Here's a question that should disturb you. Who profits from your pain? Not metaphorically, literally. Who makes money when you suffer? The answer is more people than you think. Let's start with the obvious. Prisons. They're not rehabilitation centers. They're businesses. Every person incarcerated is a revenue stream. Extended sentences mean extended profits. Now ask, where's the financial incentive to reduce crime? Where's the profit in prevention? There isn't one. Prevention costs money up front. Punishment generates it. That's why prisons get funded and youth programs get cut. Move to addiction. Pharmaceutical companies made billions creating and pushing opioids. When the crisis exploded, who profited? Rehab centers. Treatment facilities. Addiction is a business model, both creating it and treating it. Health insurance? They make money by collecting premiums and denying claims. Your suffering, your medical crisis, is literally their profit margin. The sicker you are, the more they can charge. The more they can deny, the more they keep. Even your data, your emotional state, your anxiety gets monetized. Social media platforms track when you're sad, lonely, vulnerable. That's when you're most likely to click, to scroll, to engage. Your despair is engagement. Engagement is ad revenue. Disaster capitalism is real. Crisis creates opportunity. For some, wars are profitable for weapons manufacturers. Natural disasters are profitable for contractors. Economic collapse is profitable for those with capital to buy up distressed assets. This isn't conspiracy, it's business. The system doesn't want to eliminate suffering. It wants to manage it, to extract value from it, to ensure it continues at a level that's profitable, but not destabilizing. Now here's what makes this truly insidious. The people benefiting from this are often not evil. They're not cartoon villains twirling mustaches. They're ordinary people working ordinary jobs within systems that incentivize harm. The insurance adjuster denying your claim. They're hitting their targets. The judge sending someone to prison. They're following guidelines. The pharma executive. They're maximizing shareholder value. The evil isn't personal, it's structural. So what do you do with this knowledge? First, follow the money. When someone says they want to help, ask, how do they profit if the problem continues? Second, support prevention over punishment. Not because it feels good, but because it actually works. And it threatens the profit model of managed suffering. And third, recognize that until we change the incentives, the outcomes won't change. As long as suffering is more profitable than healing, suffering will continue. This isn't about giving up. It's about seeing clearly. Because you can't fix a problem you don't understand. And one of the things you need to understand? How power always protects itself first. Power protects itself first, always. When a scandal breaks, when corruption is exposed, when harm is revealed, watch what happens next. Does power apologize? Does it accept responsibility? Does it change? Number. It protects itself. Every institution's first instinct when threatened is self-preservation. Not justice, not truth, survival. Police departments protect bad officers. Churches protect abusers. Corporations protect executives. Politicians protect each other. Not because they're all corrupt, but because the institution's survival matters more than any individual within it, or any victim outside it. Think about whistleblowers, people who expose wrongdoing from within. What happens to them? Are they celebrated, protected, rewarded? They're destroyed. Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, reality winner. They revealed government overreach, war crimes, election interference, and they paid with their freedom, their careers, their lives as they knew them. Because power doesn't thank people who expose it, it eliminates them. This pattern repeats everywhere. When a company's product kills people, does it immediately recall it? Or does it calculate, what costs more, lawsuits or recalls? When a politician is caught lying, do they admit it? Or do they attack the source, muddy the waters, and wait for the news cycle to move on? The playbook is always the same. Deny, deflect, destroy the messenger, protect the institution. And here's why this matters. You need to understand that appealing to power's sense of justice is often useless. Power doesn't have a conscience. It has interests. And its first interest is always itself. This doesn't mean every person in power is evil, but individuals within systems of power are constrained by those systems. The good cop who reports corruption gets pushed out. The ethical executive who prioritizes people over profit gets replaced. The honest politician who won't play the game doesn't advance. The system selects for self-protection. So what do? First, stop expecting power to police itself. It won't. Meaningful accountability only comes from external pressure. Second, understand leverage. Power responds to threats to its survival. Economic pressure, public exposure, mass non-compliance. Not because it develops a conscience, but because resistance threatens its stability. And third, remember, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has. It never will. Frederick Douglass said that. And it's still true. You can't vote away entrenched power. You can't reason with it. You can only organize against it, because power will always protect itself first, until the cost of doing so becomes too high. And one of the ways power maintains itself? By engineering your dependencies. Addiction is engineered, not accidental. You think you're weak. That's what they want you to think. You can't stop scrolling, can't stop buying, can't stop checking, can't stop consuming. And somewhere in your head, a voice whispers, "What's wrong with me?" Nothing. Nothing is wrong with you. Something is being done to you. Addiction isn't a moral failing. It's a design feature. Let's talk about your phone. Every notification is timed. Every reward is variable. Every interface is optimized to keep you engaged. Teams of engineers with PhDs in behavioral psychology work to make apps as addictive as possible. Why? Because your attention is worth money. The average person checks their phone 96 times a day. That's not weak willpower. That's sophisticated psychological manipulation meeting biological vulnerability. Variable reward schedules, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive, are baked into every app you use. You scroll because you might find something interesting. That uncertainty is what hooks you. Casinos figured this out decades ago. Tech companies just scaled it. Now look at food. Ultra-processed foods aren't accidentally addictive. They're engineered to hit your bliss point, the exact combination of fat, sugar, and salt that overrides your natural satiety signals. Food scientists literally design products to be irresistible, to make you eat past fullness, to create cravings. And when you can't stop eating them, when you gain weight, when your health declines, who gets blamed? You do. Your lack of self-control. Not the billions spent making food as addictive as possible. Shopping, same thing. Sales are timed to create urgency. Algorithms show you exactly what you're vulnerable to. One-click purchasing removes friction. Endless recommendations ensure you never feel satisfied. You're not shopping. You're being shopped. Even your work can be addictive. Hustle culture, gamified productivity, constant connectivity. You're rewarded for overwork with status, money, identity, and punished for boundaries with guilt and fear of falling behind. Burnout isn't your failure. It's the system working as designed. Here's what makes this truly insidious. Addiction is profitable. The more dependent you are, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you are, the more valuable you are to those selling to you. So the system doesn't want you free, it wants you hooked. But here's the thing. Understanding this doesn't instantly free you. But it does shift the blame where it belongs. Not on you, but on the systems engineered to exploit you. So what do? First, recognize engineered addiction for what it is. That's not weakness you're fighting. That's billions of dollars in research designed to hijack your brain. Second, change your environment. You can't willpower your way out of a system designed to defeat willpower. But you can remove triggers, delete apps, change routes, build friction between you and the behavior. And third, reject the shame. Addiction thrives on shame. Shame keeps you isolated, keeps you blaming yourself, keeps you from seeing the pattern. You're not broken. The system is working exactly as designed. And the first step to breaking free is seeing that clearly. Now let's talk about another trade-off people make. Freedom for certainty. Most people will trade freedom for certainty. Freedom is terrifying. Let me prove it to you. Imagine waking up tomorrow with no obligations, no job, no debt, no expectations, no schedule, just pure freedom. What would you do? If you're honest, That question probably makes you anxious, not excited. Anxious. Because freedom isn't comfortable. It's responsibility. It's risk. It's the burden of creating meaning rather than receiving it. Most people, when truly given the choice, prefer certainty, structure, someone telling them what to do. Not because they're weak, because humans are wired for predictability. Uncertainty triggers threat responses in our brains. Certainty, even uncomfortable certainty, feels safer than unknown possibility. This is why authoritarian leaders succeed. They promise order, simple answers, clear enemies, guaranteed outcomes, and people accept restrictions on their freedom in exchange for that psychological comfort. After September 11th, Americans traded privacy for security. Patriot Act, surveillance, TSA. Most people barely resisted because the trade felt worth it. Certainty of safety over freedom of privacy. During COVID, governments imposed lockdowns, mandates, restrictions. And while some resisted, most complied. Not because they were cowards, but because certainty of protection felt better than freedom amid chaos. I'm not arguing whether these were right or wrong. I'm pointing out the pattern. When people feel threatened, they reach for certainty, even when it costs freedom. You see this in personal life too. People stay in jobs they hate because the paycheck is certain. They stay in relationships that drain them because being alone is uncertain. They follow beliefs they haven't examined because doubt is uncomfortable. Certainty is addictive. It removes the burden of decision. You don't have to figure out who you are if someone tells you. You don't have to navigate complexity if someone gives you simple rules. But here's the cost. Every time you trade freedom for certainty, you give someone else power over your life. The employer who controls your income controls your choices. The system that provides your security demands your compliance. The ideology that gives you identity requires your loyalty. And slowly, without noticing, you become dependent. Not just materially, but psychologically. You need someone to tell you what to do, what to think, how to live. Real freedom requires tolerating uncertainty, sitting with ambiguity, making choices without guarantees. And most people, most of the time, would rather not. But here's what makes this tragic. Certainty is often an illusion. The systems promising security can't actually deliver it. Jobs disappear, relationships end, governments change, ideologies collapse. You traded your freedom for certainty that was never real. So what's the alternative? It's not reckless freedom. It's not chaos. It's learning to be okay with uncertainty, building yourself strong enough to handle ambiguity, making choices based on values rather than seeking guarantees. It's choosing freedom even when it's uncomfortable, because the alternative, comfortable dependency is a slow suffocation. Most people will trade freedom for certainty. But that doesn't mean you have to. And one of the most seductive certainties is belonging. Let's talk about that. Belonging is more important than truth. You're at dinner with people you care about, your family, your friends, your community. Someone says something you know is wrong, not opinion, wrong, factually incorrect, harmfully incorrect. Do you correct them? Most people don't, because in that moment, they're making a calculation, unconsciously, instantly. What costs more, being right or being accepted? And almost every time, acceptance wins. This isn't weakness. This is biology. For most of human history, exile meant death. Your survival depended on the tribe. So your brain is hardwired to prioritize belonging over almost everything else, including truth. Think about religion. Billions of people hold beliefs they can't prove, that contradict evidence, that conflict with each other. Why? Because those beliefs bind communities together. The truth value matters less than the social bond. Questioning the belief means questioning your place in the community, and most people won't risk that. Look at political tribalism. People don't adopt positions based on evidence. They adopt positions based on identity, on which tribe they belong to. And once that identity is formed, contradicting it feels like betrayal, not of ideas, but of people. That's why facts rarely change minds, because people aren't defending ideas. They're defending belonging. You see this in workplaces too. Everyone knows the company's values are hollow. The mission statement is meaningless. But saying that out loud, that marks you as disloyal. Not to truth, to the group. So people nod. They repeat the slogans, not because they believe them, but because belonging requires it. This is how dangerous ideas spread. Not through logic, but through community. When your identity is tied to a group, you'll defend that group's beliefs, even when you secretly doubt them. Because losing the belief means losing the people. And humans would rather be wrong together than right alone. Now here's where this gets really uncomfortable. Every group does this. Progressive spaces, conservative spaces, religious spaces, activist spaces, academic spaces. Every community has unspoken rules about what you can question and what you can't. Every tribe has orthodoxies, and violating them gets you cast out. So most people learn to self-censor, to smile and nod, to save their doubts for private moments. Because speaking truth to your community costs more than living with cognitive dissonance. But here's the cost. You lose yourself, piece by piece. Every time you swallow a truth to preserve belonging, you train yourself to value acceptance over authenticity. And eventually, you can't remember what you actually believe versus what you perform. So what do? First, recognize the choice you're making. You're not weak for wanting to belong. You're human. But at least be honest about the trade-off. Second, find communities that value truth-seeking over loyalty. They're rare, but they exist. Places where disagreement isn't betrayal, where questions are welcome. And third, get comfortable with the possibility of being alone, not forever, but temporarily. Because sometimes speaking the truth means losing belonging, and you have to decide which you value more. Belonging is powerful, it's necessary, but when it requires you to abandon truth, it becomes a cage. And truth gets complicated when you realize the rules themselves aren't fair. Let's examine that. Rules are made for the powerless. Laws are supposed to apply equally to everyone. That's the story anyway. But watch what happens when a rich person breaks the law versus when a poor person does. A CEO commits fraud costing millions. They pay a fine. Maybe step down, but no jail time. Meanwhile, someone steals $100 to eat and gets years in prison. Same legal system, different rules. Because rules aren't designed to constrain everyone equally. They're designed to control the people without power, while giving the powerful room to maneuver. Think about jaywalking laws. In theory, they apply to everyone. In practice, they're enforced in poor neighborhoods, used as pretexts for stops and searches. They're not about safety, they're about control. Tax laws? The wealthy have loopholes, Offshore accounts, legal teams. The working class has wages that get taxed before they even see them. Same laws, different access. Corporate regulations. Companies break them constantly. And the punishment? Fines that cost less than the profit from breaking them. That's not a punishment. That's a business expense. But when you break a rule, when you can't afford a lawyer, when you don't have connections, the full weight comes down on you. Here's the pattern. Rules give the appearance of fairness while maintaining hierarchy. This isn't even hidden. Look at mandatory minimum sentences. They don't apply equally. They target specific communities. Crack cocaine, more common in black neighborhoods, carried harsher sentences than powder cocaine, more common in white neighborhoods. Same drug, different rules. Or look at school discipline. Zero-tolerance policies sound fair, but they're enforced unevenly. Black students are suspended at higher rates for the same behaviors. The rule is equal. The enforcement isn't. Even in subtle ways, rules punish the powerless. You need money to take time off work to fight a ticket. Money to hire lawyers. Money to navigate bureaucracy. If you don't have it, the rule becomes absolute. If you do, it becomes negotiable. And here's what makes this especially cruel. You're taught to respect the rules, to see them as neutral arbiters of justice. So when they crush you and leave others untouched, you blame yourself, not the system. But the system is working exactly as designed. This doesn't mean rules are inherently bad. Structure matters. But structure designed by the powerful, enforced by the powerful, and most harshly applied to the powerless. That's not justice. That's control. So what do you do? First, stop assuming the rules are neutral. They're not. They have authors, beneficiaries, victims. Second, recognize that breaking unjust rules is sometimes moral. Civil disobedience exists for a reason. History celebrates rule breakers who challenged unjust systems. And third, demand better rules. Rules written with input from everyone they affect. Rules enforced equally. Rules that protect people rather than hierarchies. Until then, remember, just because something is legal doesn't make it right. And just because something is illegal doesn't make it wrong. The rules serve someone. Make sure you know who. And history itself? That's written by those same people. Let's talk about that. History is written by those who win. You learned history in school. Dates, names, events, neat narratives about progress and civilization. But here's what you weren't taught. You learned the winner's version. History isn't objective truth. It's a curated story told by whoever had the power to write it down and teach it. And what they choose to include, to emphasize, to erase. That tells you everything about who they are and what they want you to believe. Think about American history. You learned about the Founding Fathers, freedom, democracy, revolution. But how much did you learn about slavery, about genocide of indigenous peoples, about women's exclusion, about the reality that all men are created equal meant land-owning white men? That's not an accident. That's editing. Choosing which story preserves the nation's mythology. Or think about war. Every country teaches that their wars were necessary, defensive, noble. But ask the other side, they teach the exact opposite. Different wars, depending on who's telling the story. Who's lying, maybe both, maybe neither. Because history isn't about truth, it's about narrative. And narrative serves power. Columbus discovered America. Except there were millions of people already there. But their history didn't matter because they didn't win. They didn't get to write the textbooks. The British Empire spread civilization, or extracted wealth through violence, depending on whether you're reading British or Indian histories. You see this in smaller ways too. Company histories are written by PR departments. Family histories are told by whoever controls the narrative. Even your own personal history gets rewritten as you go, emphasizing what fits the story you want to tell. Here's what makes this dangerous. Whoever controls the past controls the present. If you can convince people that the current system has always been this way, that it's natural, inevitable, just, they won't question it. That's why battles over history are so fierce. Statues, curricula, museum exhibits. They're not just about the past. They're about legitimizing or challenging current power structures. And that's why people fight so hard when history gets questioned. When monuments come down. When curricula change. It's not really about honoring the past. It's about protecting current arrangements of power that claim legitimacy from that past. So what do? First, read multiple versions. Not just what you were taught, but what those who lost tell. Not just official histories, but suppressed ones. Second, ask, who wrote this? What did they want me to believe? What did they leave out? And third, recognize that the story you were taught is a story, not the story. And understanding whose story it is helps you understand whose interest it serves. History isn't dead. It's a living argument. And until we hear all the voices, especially the silenced ones, we don't have history. We have propaganda. Speaking of what we're taught to accept, let's talk about your value in the system. You're meant to feel replaceable. Your job has a job posting written before you even quit. Your relationships have people waiting in the wings. Your role in any system is designed to be filled by the next person. And you're supposed to know this, to feel it, to internalize it. Because replaceable people work harder, complain less, accept worse conditions. Think about how employment works. You're hired because you fill a need, but you're also reminded constantly that others could fill that need too. We're lucky to have you really means, but we'd be fine without you. That's not accidental. That's strategy. The more replaceable you feel, the less likely you are to demand better treatment, better pay, better conditions. The fear of being replaced keeps you compliant. You see this in relationships too. Nobody says it explicitly, but the message is there. If you're too difficult, too demanding, too much, there's always someone easier. Even in activism, movements, communities, you're reminded that the cause is bigger than you, which is true. But it's also used to extract more labor while offering less support. The genius of making people feel replaceable is that they replace themselves. They burn out trying to become irreplaceable. They sacrifice health, boundaries, values, trying to prove their worth. But the system wasn't designed for you to become irreplaceable. It was designed to keep you afraid that you already aren't. Now here's the twist. You are replaceable. In the system's terms. Someone else can do your job, play your role, fill your spot. But that doesn't mean you lack value. It means the system doesn't measure value accurately. Because you're not just a function. You're a person. With specific experiences, perspectives, relationships, creativity. You're not replaceable as a human. Only as a cog. The question is, are you going to accept being treated like a cog? Here's what changes when you stop believing you're replaceable. You start setting boundaries, asking for more, leaving situations that don't serve you, because you're not desperate to prove your worth. You know it already. And ironically, that's when you become hardest to replace. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are. The people who are truly valuable aren't the ones desperately proving themselves. They're the ones who know their worth and won't accept less. So yes, you're meant to feel replaceable. The system needs that fear to function. But you don't have to cooperate. And part of what makes people cooperate is a willingness to compromise themselves. Let's explore that. Success often requires moral blindness. You're offered a promotion, more money, more status, more power. There's just one small thing. The company does something you know is harmful, exploitative, environmentally destructive, whatever. But it's not your department, not your decision, not your responsibility. Do you take it? Most people do. Because success in existing systems often requires looking away, not at everything, just enough, just the parts that would make success uncomfortable. Think about how corporate success works. To rise in most companies, you can't be too ethical. Not because companies are evil, but because they're structured to prioritize profit. And profit often conflicts with ethics. So the people who succeed are the ones who can rationalize, who can compartmentalize, who can say, that's just business, and mean it. The lawyer who defends corporations against people they harmed. The PR executive who spins disasters. The consultant who recommends layoffs. They're not monsters. They're just willing to not see certain things. This happens in smaller ways too. The manager who notices harassment but doesn't report it because it would create problems. The employee who sees corner cutting but stays quiet to protect their job. The professional who knows their industry causes harm but focuses on their own work. Moral blindness isn't deliberate evil. It's strategic ignorance. You choose not to examine too closely, not to ask uncomfortable questions, not to connect your work to its consequences. Because if you did, you might have to make different choices, and those choices might cost you. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many paths to conventional success require compromising on values. Not dramatically, just incrementally. A small compromise here, a rationalization there. Until you look up and realize you're doing things you never thought you would. The person who refuses, who asks the uncomfortable questions, who insists on connecting actions to consequences. They don't usually climb as high. Not because they're less capable, but because they're less willing. Now, this isn't universal. Some people achieve success ethically, but they're often the exception. And they usually face harder paths, slower progress, more resistance. The system rewards people who can separate their personal ethics from their professional actions, who can be kind in their personal life while participating in harm professionally, who can see the problem but stay focused on their own advancement. But here's what this costs: your integrity, your sense of self, the ability to look in the mirror without flinching. And here's the question you have to answer. What's success worth if you lose yourself getting there? Because there's another kind of success, smaller, quieter, less celebrated. The success of maintaining your values even when it costs you. Of choosing integrity over advancement. Of being able to sleep at night. That won't get you featured in magazines, won't make you rich, won't impress people at parties, but it might let you stay whole. So the choice isn't really about success. It's about what kind of person you're willing to become to get it, and whether that person is someone you can live with. Now let's talk about how your very identity gets commodified. Your identity is built to be sold back to you. Think about how you define yourself, your interests, your aesthetic, your values, your identity. Now ask, did you choose these, or were they marketed to you? That's an uncomfortable question, because we like to think our identity is authentic, self-created, but look closer. From childhood, you've been surrounded by messages about who to be, what to like, how to present yourself. And those messages weren't neutral. They were crafted to turn you into a consumer. Gender gets marketed. Blue for boys, pink for girls. Not because it's natural, but because it doubles the market. Can't reuse clothes between siblings if they're gender-coded. Your hobbies? Someone profits from them. Your fashion sense? Created by brands. Your lifestyle? A target demographic. Even rebellion is packaged and sold. Want to be countercultural? There's a product for that. Want to reject mainstream values? Here's the alternative mainstream, complete with its own brands and aesthetics. The genius of modern marketing isn't selling you products. It's selling you an identity, then renting it back to you through consumption. You're not buying clothes. You're buying an image of who you want to be. Not buying technology. You're buying membership in a tribe. Not buying experiences. You're buying a curated version of yourself to present to others. Social media accelerated this. Your identity becomes performative, carefully curated. Each post, each image, each interaction is branding. You become both the product and the consumer. And algorithms learn your vulnerabilities. They know what makes you feel inadequate, what aspirations you have, what insecurities drive your behavior, and they serve you endless content designed to make you feel incomplete, followed immediately by products that promise completion. This is how identity becomes commodified. You're not a person, you're a market segment, a collection of preferences and behaviors to be predicted, influenced, monetized. But here's what makes this truly insidious. It's so normalized you don't see it happening. You think you're expressing yourself. You're actually performing a script written by marketers. Your authentic self is assembled from branded parts. Your individuality looks suspiciously like everyone else in your demographic. So what do? First, notice the pattern. When you want something, ask, is this actually mine? Or was it suggested to me? Second, seek sources of identity that can't be commodified. Relationships, experiences, values that don't require consumption to express. And third, get comfortable with being undefined, with not fitting neatly into a market category, with being a person instead of a persona. Your identity is yours, but only if you reclaim it from the systems trying to sell it back to you. Sometimes staying silent is how you reclaim power. Let's explore that. Silence is often a survival strategy. You're in a situation where speaking up would be right, morally right, factually right, but you stay quiet. Does that make you a coward? Maybe. Or maybe you're surviving. Because silence isn't always agreement. Sometimes it's calculation. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's the only power you have. Think about people in abusive relationships. Why don't they speak up? Why don't they just leave? Because speaking up can get them killed. Because silence keeps them alive until they can escape. It's not weakness, it's strategy. Or people in authoritarian regimes. Why don't they protest? Why don't they speak truth to power? Because the cost is prison, disappearance, death. Silence isn't cowardice, it's survival. Even in everyday life, silence can be strategic. The employee who sees corruption but stays quiet because they have kids to feed. The family member who doesn't confront abuse because they're financially dependent. The person who swallows their truth because speaking, it means losing everything. They're not weak, they're trapped. And silence is how they survive until they're not. Here's what privileged people often miss. They can afford to speak because the cost is low for them. They have financial security, social capital, safety nets. So they judge others for staying silent without understanding the calculation being made. But for people without those protections, silence isn't moral failure. It's risk assessment. This doesn't mean silence is always right. Sometimes it enables harm. Sometimes it perpetuates systems that hurt others. The person who stays silent at work while someone else is harassed. The bystander who doesn't intervene. The community that looks away. That silence has costs too. Moral costs. Costs to your sense of self. So the real question isn't whether silence is good or bad, it's, what is this silence protecting? And at what cost? If your silence protects your survival, that's different than silence that protects your comfort. If your silence protects others, that's different than silence that enables harm. The point is, don't judge silence without understanding its context. And don't mistake someone's silence for their truth. Because sometimes the people who say nothing are the ones seeing the most. They're just waiting for a moment when speaking won't cost everything. And speaking of what costs everything, let's talk about how complexity gets flattened. Simplicity wins, even when it's wrong. Complex problems demand complex solutions, but complex solutions don't win. Simple ones do. Even when they're completely wrong. Why? Because humans aren't built to handle complexity. We're built to find patterns quickly and act decisively. That kept us alive when we were hunting and being hunted. But in a complex world, that instinct becomes a liability. Think about political issues, climate change, healthcare, economic inequality. These are deeply complex problems with interconnected causes and no easy solutions. But what wins elections? Simple slogans: build the wall, Medicare for all, make America great again. Not because they're accurate, because they're memorable, actionable, emotionally satisfying. The candidate who explains nuance loses to the one who promises simple solutions. Every time. You see this everywhere, in media, in business, in personal advice. The guru who says, just do this one thing, gets more followers than the expert who says, it's complicated. Because people don't want complexity. They want certainty. They want to believe there's a simple answer, a clear enemy, an easy fix. And anyone offering that, they'll listen to them. Even when they're lying. This is how conspiracy theories spread. They take complexity, overwhelming complexity, and simplify it into a story, with villains, with a plot. It's wrong, but it's coherent. And coherence feels better than chaos. This is how demagogues rise. They offer simple answers to complex problems, and people desperately want to believe them. But here's the cost. Simple solutions to complex problems don't work. They fail, sometimes catastrophically. But by the time they fail, the person who sold them has moved on, or they blame the failure on not going far enough. And people believe them, because the alternative, accepting that there are no simple answers, is too uncomfortable. So what do? First, be suspicious of simple answers. Not dismissive, suspicious. Ask, what complexity is this ignoring? Second, Practice sitting with ambiguity, with not knowing, with "it depends." It's uncomfortable, but it's honest. And third, demand better communication of complexity. We need people who can explain complicated things without oversimplifying them, who can hold nuance while still being clear. Because simplicity will keep winning as long as we reward it. But the problems we face, they're not simple. And pretending they are is killing us. Now let's talk about how obedience itself becomes confused with virtue. Obedience feels like virtue. Following rules feels good. Doing what you're told feels safe. Being compliant feels like being good. And that's dangerous, because obedience isn't virtue. It's just obedience. And sometimes the virtuous thing is to disobey. But we're conditioned from childhood to conflate the two. Good children obey. Good students follow rules. Good citizens comply. You're rewarded for obedience with praise, with advancement, with belonging, and punished for disobedience with shame, with consequences, with exclusion. So you learn. Obedience equals goodness. This is how ordinary people participate in atrocities. Not because they're evil, because they're obedient. The Milgram experiment proved this. Normal people, good people, administered what they thought were lethal shocks, not because they wanted to hurt anyone, because an authority figure told them to continue. Obedience overrode their moral instincts. You see this everywhere. Police who enforce unjust laws, soldiers who follow illegal orders, employees who implement harmful policies. They're not all monsters. They're people who confused obedience with morality. "I was just following orders" is the most dangerous phrase in human history, because it lets you commit harm while feeling righteous. Now, this doesn't mean all rules are bad. Structure matters. Coordination requires some level of compliance. The question is, where's your line? When does obedience become complicity? When does following orders become participating in harm? That's something each person has to answer for themselves. But you have to ask the question. You can't default to obedience and assume that makes you good. Because the most ethical people in history were often disobedient. They broke laws, defied authority, refused to comply, and they were punished for it. Called criminals, traitors, troublemakers. Until history proved them right. So ask yourself, are you obeying because it's right, or because it's easier, because it's moral, or because it's rewarded? Virtue isn't automatic compliance, it's conscious choice. Sometimes to obey, sometimes to resist. The difference is thinking for yourself, even when that's uncomfortable, even when that's dangerous. And thinking for yourself means recognizing when you're being kept unaware. Let's talk about that. You're rewarded for staying unaware. Ignorance is bliss. Not just as a saying, as a survival strategy. The person who doesn't notice problems, who doesn't ask uncomfortable questions, who keeps their head down and goes along, they get promoted, get liked, get left alone. The person who notices too much, who questions, who points out contradictions, they get labeled difficult, negative, a problem. You're rewarded for staying unaware because awareness threatens stability. If you start noticing injustice, you might want to change it. If you start seeing contradictions, you might point them out. If you start questioning systems, you might resist them. So systems are built to keep you just aware enough to function, but not aware enough to rebel. Think about how this works. At work, you're given just enough information to do your job. not enough to understand the bigger picture, not enough to see how your work connects to harm. In politics, you're given simplified narratives, good guys and bad guys, your team and theirs, not the complexity that would make clear-cut loyalty impossible. In consumption, you're kept unaware of supply chains, of labor conditions, of environmental impact. Because if you knew, you might stop buying. Awareness is dangerous. To systems, to power, to comfortable illusions. So you're rewarded for not looking too closely, for accepting explanations without digging deeper, for going along without asking why. And most people take that reward. Because awareness is exhausting. It's painful. It creates cognitive dissonance. It forces you to make harder choices. It's easier to not know, to not see, to not think about it. But here's the cost. You become complicit in what you refuse to see. Your ignorance becomes participation. And worse, you lose your agency. Because you can't change what you don't acknowledge. You can't resist what you won't see. So what do? First, recognize the reward structure. Notice when you're being encouraged not to ask questions, when curiosity is discouraged, when awareness is punished. Second, seek information even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Follow the supply chain. Ask what happens next. Connect your actions to their consequences. And third, accept that awareness comes with responsibility. Once you see, you can't unsee. And that changes what you can ethically ignore. You're rewarded for staying unaware. But the price of that reward is your integrity. And one of the most powerful tools for maintaining unawareness? Shame. Let's examine that. Shame is a tool for mass control. You don't need chains to control people. You just need shame. Shame is more effective than force. Because force creates resistance. Shame creates compliance. Voluntary compliance. People police themselves. Think about how this works. From childhood, you're taught shame. Shame about your body, your desires, your questions, your failures. That shame doesn't go away. It becomes internalized. You don't need external enforcement anymore. You enforce it on yourself. This is genius. If power had to actively control everyone, it would be exhausting, expensive, obvious. But shame? Shame is self-sustaining. It replicates. It spreads. People shame each other. And the system doesn't have to do anything. You see this everywhere. Body shame keeps people buying products, keeps them insecure, keeps them consuming solutions to problems that were manufactured to begin with. Social shame keeps people conforming, following norms, not deviating, not questioning. Because the cost of shame, of being laughed at, excluded, humiliated, feels unbearable. Moral shame keeps people compliant. You're shamed for being too successful, for not being successful enough, for having ambition, for lacking it. Whatever keeps you in your designated place. Shame is incredibly effective because it hijacks your social instincts. Humans are tribal. We need belonging. And shame is the threat of exclusion, of being cast out, of being alone. So you'll do almost anything to avoid it. This is how societies enforce norms without laws, how cultures maintain traditions without force, how systems perpetuate themselves without obvious coercion, through shame. But here's what's important to understand. Shame is often a tool, not a moral truth. When you feel shame, ask, who benefits from this feeling? What behavior is this meant to control? What system does this shame serve? Because legitimate guilt, when you've genuinely harmed someone, is different from shame. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt can motivate repair. Shame just creates paralysis, self-hatred, compliance, and that's exactly what systems of control want. People who hate themselves enough to stay in line. So what do you do? First, distinguish between guilt and shame. Take responsibility for harm without internalizing unworthiness. Second, examine whose voice is shaming you. Is it your own values, or is it someone else's control disguised as conscience? And third, build shame resistance, not shamelessness, but the ability to act according to your values even when others shame you for it. Because the alternative is spending your life performing for an audience that will never be satisfied, shrinking to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, living in fear of judgment from systems that profit from your compliance. Shame is a tool for mass control, but only if you let it be. And finally, let's talk about the ultimate trade-off: safety versus freedom. Most people would rather be safe than free. Here's the final uncomfortable truth. When things get difficult, when the world feels dangerous, when uncertainty becomes unbearable, most people don't reach for freedom. They reach for safety, even when it costs everything. Freedom is terrifying. It's responsibility. It's risk. It's the possibility of failure with no one to blame but yourself. Safety is comfortable. Someone else makes the decisions. Someone else takes responsibility. You just comply, and you're protected. Or so the promise goes. This is why authoritarian systems succeed. Not through force alone, but through offering certainty in exchange for control. Order in exchange for obedience. Protection in exchange for freedom. And when people are scared enough, they take that deal. You've seen this. After every crisis, people voluntarily give up rights, accept surveillance, welcome restrictions. Because fear makes freedom feel dangerous and control feel safe. But here's what that trade never mentions. The safety is temporary, illusory, conditional. You're only safe as long as you comply, as long as you're useful, as long as you don't threaten the system offering protection. And the freedom you traded? That's permanent. Once given up, it's nearly impossible to reclaim. This isn't about being reckless. It's about recognizing the pattern. Throughout history, people have traded freedom for safety, and then been shocked when the protection disappears, but the control remains. So the question isn't whether you value safety. Everyone does. The question is, what are you willing to trade for it, and who decides when you've paid enough? Because freedom isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to be afraid and choose anyway. To accept uncertainty rather than surrender autonomy. To be uncomfortable rather than controlled. Most people would rather be safe than free. But that doesn't mean you have to be. These aren't easy truths. They're not meant to be. But understanding how the world actually works, that's the first step toward navigating it with your integrity intact. The system counts on you not seeing these patterns, on you accepting what you're told, on you choosing comfort over awareness. But now you see them. And once you see, you can't unsee. The question is,